Well, hey church, welcome back to the last midweek devotional of the summer. I cannot believe summer's flown by so fast. We're in the book of John and we're kind of walking through different characters who have got to encounter Jesus throughout the Gospel of John. And John chapter 18 tells the story of a man named Pontius Pilate. Pilate is probably a famous person in Christianity or in the Bible, but for those of you who don't know, Pontius Pilate is this ruler of Rome, and the religious leaders bring Jesus to Rome, to this man named Pilate, and Pilate then begins to be very, very passive and not to want to try to pick sides. He attempts to kind of walk this line of not having to choose between Christ or the people. And he does this in a couple of ways. He redirects the conversation continually. He continually redirects people and tries to avoid anyone being responsible for the decision that he's about to make besides him. He doesn't want to be the one responsible for it. He also postpones. Hey, take him here. Let him stay here. He refuses to decide on things. He kind of refuses to engage with the people, and then he allows the people ultimately to decide the fate of Christ. And he certainly plays a role, but it's a very unwilling role, and he's very passive as a leader and as a man. And I think this seems to be an issue in our culture as well, particularly in men. This seems to be an especial issue for men in our culture, and that is that we are seemingly so passive about things. I think about men in America today. We're passive about Christ. It's typically the women who are the ones who are leading the relationship in the direction towards following and serving Jesus. We're also passive about the church. How often does our culture portray this story, this picture of women leading men to church? And you know, he kind of has to be roped into going to service because, well, they're married now and he doesn't really want to, but he has to. They're often passive about their wives. So often in our culture, men seem to be focused on everything besides their wife and being locked in and being intentional and being very active in their relationship and then with their kids, right? I think it's a natural assumption to say that if men are not active and if they're not very intentional with their wives or their church or with Christ, the same will be true with their kids. Sadly, I think our culture, men are passionate about certain things, but not about those things. Right? Men will often say, well, I'm just not really like a passionate person. I'm more of a passive person. But you're passive. You're passionate about your video games. Passionate about drinking beer, passionate about your favorite drink, we're passionate about sports, we're passionate about fantasy football, our careers. So often in America, the men will be locked in and engaged and pushing and driving forward for their career, and then they come home and they sit down and they disengage the rest of the day and have no activity with their family. The reason for this, I think, is that we're not courageous as a culture. Men are taught nowadays not to be courageous. And so we don't know how to be courageous and still be kind, right? We have two variations of people. Like, we think that either you're courageous or you're kind. But you can be both. You can be courageous and kind, especially in today's world. We can learn how to be courageous and to be kind. We are not courageous at times, and so we don't show passion because we are afraid. We seem to lack courage because we don't want to handle the fear of what goes on. We can be cultural, right? Culture can point out that, well, men shouldn't be like this. You know, they can really try to push that on us, but also I think we're taught so easily that we don't have to be courageous anymore. Fail at something, don't do it ever again. Get knocked down, don't get back up. Go complain. Just as from childhood on, men are often shown that we don't need to be courageous, and this is why we lack courage. That's why we won't ask the girl out. We see the girl, but we won't ask her out. Well, she might reject me. Okay, well, ask someone else. We finally ask the girl out, we date the girl, and we're too afraid to put on our profiles that we're dating them because we don't want other people to know. And so there's this chronic fear, but women strongly desire a man who has courage, who is certainly kind, but he has courage and he has passion. In fact, recently I was talking to some ladies from another country. They were here visiting America for a while, and I said, tell me about American men. And they said, well, you guys have no courage. You guys won't ask anybody out. You won't say you're dating people when you are. American men have no courage, and it's really, really sad. Even in Pilate, he decides to postpone this decision forever, right? Which a lot of times we do. We try to push off, well, I'll just wait and see what happens. But postponed decisions are the same as no decision. And so for us men, I think it's time for us to stop being so passive. I think it's time for us to be courageous. I believe that men should be courageous. We should attempt bold things. We should attempt great things. Certainly, I definitely believe that my wife is very bold. She runs multiple businesses, and she follows her dreams, and she chases those things. I hope my daughter is as bold and as confident and as courageous as my wife is. We're trying to teach her to be those things, but I see a lack of these things in men. And so a lot of times we lose out on our relationship with Christ because we simply don't have the courage to be passionate about pursuing Christ. We don't want people to be embarrassed. We don't want ourselves to be embarrassed or any of these things. We simply lack courage. A lot of times we lack courage in our family relationships. We refuse to speak up and say what's kind, what's true in a kind way, and we hold on so long that all of a sudden we lash out angrily later on. I think it's also true that we need to be courageous about church. It's time for us as a family to go to church, not only when the wife and the mom drags the rest of us or when the child has a Christmas Eve concert or something like that. It's time for us to show courage, to be passionate, to pursue Christ, to follow after him, to declare that he is who he says he would be, and to no longer try to postpone and hide and seek and get around and avoid any of these areas. Well, always remember, church, that you matter.